Nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. How's that for an opener? Nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. A few days ago, I was listening to a sermon by Andy Stanley, and he said something that gave me spiritual heartburn. Anybody know what spiritual heartburn is? I just want you guys to experience what I experienced. Listen to what he says. He says, the easiest person to deceive is the person in the mirror. Nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. The easiest person to deceive is the person in the mirror. I don't know about you guys, but I like this whole conversation way better when I was a victim of the lies. Anybody with me on that? I liked it better when the focus was on recognizing the lies that we were told by the enemy and by culture and politicians and people and all that other stuff. I liked it way better. But come on now, let's be honest. Matt Chandler is right, isn't he? He's right when he says at the end of the day, nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. And that is why if you ever find yourself on Family Feud, any Family Feud fans in here? I love the Family Feud. It's exciting. If you ever find yourself on Family Feud and maybe it's the lightning round and the great Steve Harvey comes out with his big mustache and a velvet suit and he says to you, this is it. This is your chance to win the big monies. And he says, we have surveyed 100 people. And we asked them this question, who is the biggest liar that you know? If you find yourself in that situation, if you want to win the big monies, as they say, your answer better be me. Right? You better say you. Okay, I promise you 100% that will be the top answer. The top answer to the question, who is the biggest liar you know, is you. How do I know that? I know that for the same reason that I know that I am the biggest liar that I know. I know that because nobody has sabotaged my life more than I have. I know that because you and I are the mastermind, come on now, behind every bad decision that we have ever made. I know that because nobody has scammed us and conned us more than we have scammed and conned ourselves. You and I have sold ourselves on every bad decision that we have ever made. You and I have done more to undermine our success and our progress than anybody else. I wasn't expecting any amens, but that was a little more awkward than I thought it would be. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Can I give you a few examples in case maybe you think I'm just overstating this whole thing about us lying to each other? Let me give you a few examples to jog your memory. Remember that one time that you scammed yourself into going into a vacation that you knew you couldn't afford? Right? I'm just going to throw these out there, and we're all just going to look at each other awkwardly. Those of you online, feel free to do a thumbs up if you don't remember. Even though you knew, I can't afford it, I'm going to have to pay for it for a long time, right? It's going to hurt more later than it does now. You talked yourself into it. What about that one time you talked yourself into a relationship that you knew you had no business being in, right? You're like, it's fine. You even threw some verses in there. God works all things together for the good of those who love him. I know this is maybe not what God wants from me, but God's going to redeem it, and God's going to work it out. I know it's supposed to be someone that loves Jesus, but I'm pretty sure they've been in church before. I think they drove by a church one time. That counts, right? And you talked yourself into it. Remember that one time when you quit your job and you told yourself that it was your boss? Right? Like, it's just him, man. My boss just did not like me. Even though you knew. You said the same thing about your last 3 bosses. Remember the one time you convinced yourself that you really needed fill in the blank? Right? I need it. I got to get it. I got to do whatever I can to get my hands on it. Even though you know that you just wanted it, you conned yourself into believing that you needed it. Remember that one time when you told yourself that you didn't really need help? We don't really need marriage counseling. I don't really need to tell anybody about this issue. I don't really need to see a therapist. I don't need to call my pastor. My small group, my circle don't really need to know that, even though you knew that you've done this before and you are sinking. What about that one time that you told yourself that, it's not that big of a deal for me to click, for me to browse, for me to watch this. It's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, even though you knew that if somebody else was in the room, you would not do that. You guys want me to keep going, or are we good? Let's be good, Robin says. How about this? Let me give you a personal example so you guys just don't think I'm preaching at you. For about 10 years now, I've sold myself a lie, and I've conned myself into believing that I can eat whenever I want, however I want, whenever I want, without any consequences. I don't know when it started or how it started, but it's been like a decade now that I have scammed and lied to myself and told myself a version of the lie that I can be the best dad I can be, the best husband I can be, the best pastor I can be, without ever really worrying about my physical health. And I know that sounds so stupid, but come on now, that's the point, right? The point is, you and I are really, really good at making bad ideas sound like good ideas. Right? If we're honest, nobody, come on now, church, let me know online if you feel me. Nobody can make a terrible idea sound like the best idea better than we can. Nobody lies to us more than we lie to ourselves. Listen to how a prophet put it, Jeremiah chapter 17. It's a lot of verses, but this is so good. Check out what it says in Jeremiah 17. I'm going to start in verse 5. The prophet says this. He said, "This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person," he says, "will be like a bush, a shrub in the wasteland. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives." In verse 7, he kind of switches gears for a little bit. He says, "Well, blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It doesn't fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought, and it never fails to bear fruit." That's a whole lot of verses, but simply put, here's what Jeremiah is saying. Okay, he's saying, imagine that you came up down the hallway and there are two doors. Okay, I was going to ask our team if they could build two doors for me, but that might be a little much because that was like 2 days ago that I had this idea. So just imagine for a second. They can do a lot, but, maybe not that. Imagine that there are two doors on this stage. Imagine that you had two doors. That's what Jeremiah is saying here. And door number 1 is labeled, "He who trusts in himself." Door number 2 is labeled, "He who trusts in the Lord." And Jeremiah is like, hey, this is what's behind door number 1. Behind door number 1 is a shrub, a bush in the wasteland. Behind door number 1 is no prosperity. Behind door number 1 is a parched place. It's a desert and no life. But, Jeremiah says, here's what's behind door number 2 of the one who trusts in the Lord. Behind door number 2 is a tree. Just picture the biggest oak tree possible. Behind door number 2 is water. Roots that are connected to a stream. Behind door number 2 is beautiful colors. Behind door number 2 is lots of fruit. Question: why would anybody in their right mind pick door number 1? Now just think about that for a second. Like if someone legit told you these are the two doors, shrub, desert, no prosperity, no life, this one right here, water, streams, color, and fruit. Why in the world would anybody in their right minds pick door number 1? Here is why, Jeremiah says. He's like, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me preach for a little bit and tell you why. Verse 9. Jeremiah says this. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things." Deep breaths, SC fam, deep breaths. Okay, those of you watching online, give me the deep breath emoji because we're about to go in the deep end. I don't know if you know, but your boy can't swim, so you might have to throw me a life preserver if we're going to make it through this conversation. The heart. How's this, by the way, what does our culture say? Follow your heart. How many of you heard that? Just follow your heart. Jeremiah's like, time out, bro. Let me tell you about your heart. The heart is deceitful above all things. Here's what Jeremiah is saying. He's saying the reason people pick door number 1 over door number 2 is not because they're stupid. The reason people pick door number 1 over door number 2 is because their hearts are deceitful. Right? The reason we pick door number 1 over door number 2 is because we've been deceived by our hearts into believing that door number 1 is actually better. Right? The reason we take jobs we should never take, the reason we get in relationships we know better than to get into, the reason we con ourselves into spending money that we don't have is because our hearts have deceived us. The heart, he says, is deceitful. Now listen to how he says this, above all things. Isn't that crazy? I'm like, okay, Pastor Jeremiah, okay, I mean, come on now, can you slow down a little bit? Above all things. He's like, above all things. Translation, in this battle that you and I are in between truth and lies, you ready for this? The biggest threat that you face is not the enemy or people or politicians or culture or society. In a battle for truth and lies, don't miss this, fam, the biggest threat that you and I face is our hearts. Isn't that crazy? It's like your heart is the biggest threat that you face. Your heart, he says, is deceitful above all things. That's why nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself, because that's what your heart does. And then he says this, and beyond cure. Who can understand it? The end. Thank you guys for coming. We'll see you next week. God bless. Make sure you tip Jim on the way out. Unless you guys want to do it. You guys want to do one more song, or should we just end on the most depressing verse in the entire Bible? I mean, how depressing is that? He's like, hey, the heart's deceitful above all things. You're like, well, that's bad. It gets worse. And beyond cure, who can understand it? Thank you for attending my TED Talk. Peace. Verse 10, he says this. It says, I, the Lord, search the heart. I examine the mind to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. What an amazing contrast that the prophets would say, hey, your heart is so deceitful. There's no cure, but there's a God. He searches the heart, and he examines the mind. I read that earlier this week in the contrast, and it reminded me of a very familiar story. It reminded me of the story of Adam and Eve, right? Quick recap. Most of us know this story. Genesis chapter 1, God creates everything that we see, right? The heavens and the earth and the stars and the llamas and the dogs and the pigs. He created all of the universe. Genesis chapter 2, we are introduced to man and woman, Adam and Eve, first man and first woman. Genesis chapter 3, in the beginning, we're introduced to the enemy, and the writers tell us that the serpent came and he lied to Eve, and they ate the fruit that God told them not to eat. Now, I don't know what you see when you hear that, but as a kid growing up in church, when I heard that, what I saw was the scene from the Jungle Book. You guys remember this? Mowgli, right? Remember when Mowgli and the snake was hip? What's the name of the snake? Is it anybody know? Anybody know? What? Cod is the name of the snake. Okay. Do you remember the scene where the eyes were kind of, where it pretty much hypnotized Mowgli? That's what happened, right? Remember when Mowgli was hypnotized and the eyes are spinning and it's like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. That's what I pictured when I read Genesis 3. I'm like, the serpent came, the enemy came, and the enemy just hypnotized Adam and Eve. And they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Before they knew it, they ate the fruit and it was game over. But that's not what happened. Right? What happened is we're about to see is that, yes, the enemy lied to them, but don't miss the part that their hearts played. Right? All the enemy did was throw one lie in there and point in the direction, and their hearts took over. Let me show you to put this whole conversation in perspective. Genesis chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 4. This is the first, I believe, recorded lie in the whole Bible. Listen to what the enemy says. You will certainly not die. So God told them, if you eat the fruit, you'll die. The enemy came and says, nah, he's just joking. You're not going to die. They believe that the moment you believe a lie, you act on it. And so you will not die, he says to the woman. Verse 5, for God knows that when you eat from the tree, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, listen to what happens after the enemy lied and they believed his lie. Listen to how deceitful her heart is and Adam's heart is. Listen to how the heart takes over. It says, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. You guys see what's happening in the heart there? Right? I mean, all of this time, she'd walked by the tree, didn't take a second look, as far as we know, wasn't tempted. The enemy throws a lie in there. She believes that all of a sudden, her heart does what all of our hearts do. She starts to con herself. And so she's looking at it, and she's like, wow, this is actually really good. This looks good to me, and this is pleasing to my eye, and I am going to gain wisdom if I eat this. And then she took it, and she ate it, and then she gave some to her husband, who was also with her, and he ate it. And then it says in verse 7, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made covering for themselves. I noticed this again when I was reading earlier this week, that they hid a bunch of times, right? The first time they hid, they weren't hiding from God. They were hiding from themselves. Right? Later on, they're going to hide from God, but the moment they sinned, their eyes were open, they realized they were naked, and they got fig leaves, and what they're doing is hiding from themselves. In verse 8, now we see them hide from God. He says, then the man and the woman heard the sound of God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. How weird is that? Right? God's coming. And so they start to hide. Like, we're going to hide behind the tree. I was thinking about it. I'm like, this is what it's like when we play hide and seek with my daughter, Lola. She's not here. You guys know what it's like, Eden and Nora? When we play hide and seek with Lola, what does she do, right? She'll find, like, I don't know, the worst spot in the house. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody got kids this age? We're like, hide and seek. I'm going to go count 20. And she's like, oh, and she's going to go behind the stool. And she's like, literally, she'll be like this. She's like, hey, you know. And so we're walking in the room like, where's Lola? And she's smiling. And if it takes too long, she'll even give you a little wave like, I'm over here. You guys, they hid behind a tree from the God who spoke the universe into existence. I wonder if this is what it looked like from the angel's perspective. Right? I wonder if this is what it looks like when you and I hide. Because that's what they're doing. That's what their hearts are doing. They're doubling down now. This is what our hearts do when we do things that we know we're not supposed to do. When we con ourselves, the second con, the bigger con, is that we can now make up for it by hiding. And so they hid behind a tree from God like you and I do so often. And it's interesting. Listen to what God says. Listen to what it says in the next verse. It says, but God called out to them and says, where are you? What an odd question from a God who can see all things, knows all things, and is in all places at the same time. He's like, hey, hello, where are you? It's like what happened in my house, I don't know, a week ago. My wife sent me she wanted G&Gs, so I'm like, I'm going to get us G&Gs for dinner. And I pulled out of my garage, and I decided I would rather eat Chipotle than G&Gs. But I was like, she's not going to know the difference because they said 20 minutes. I'm going to drive up to Central, pick up Chipotle for myself, and then drive up to Main Street and get G&Gs and bring it home, and she'll not know the difference, right? Of course, I get to Chipotle, and there's 20 people in line. And I'm like, well, I'm already pot committed, so I might as well get Chipotle because I'm here, right? And what do you know? I get in my Jeep, and I get a text. Where are you? Where are you? What's interesting about that text is that immediately as soon as I saw it, I knew, okay, my wife's watching, babe, you can confirm this or not if I'm making this up. I knew that the reason she was asking where I was is not because she didn't know where I was. Actually, the reason she asked where I was is because she knew where I was, right? I think I got the text at 8:40, and I knew that at 8:39, she pulled up her phone and she went to find my friends, right? Any other married people got this where you can tell where people are? I knew. I was like, she looked, and she's like, that boy is out on Central. Nowhere near J&G's. And so she's like, hey, where are you? Obviously, when God says, where are you? God wasn't saying that because God couldn't see them hiding behind the tree. No, when God was saying, where are you, it was far less about God knowing where they are and far more about them knowing where they are. When God said, where are you, it was almost like God was giving them an invitation to step into the light. When God says, where are you, it's almost as though God was trying to get them to recalibrate their hearts. But Jeremiah would say, our hearts are deceitful. And so what do you and I do? When we're backed into a corner, we double down on the lie. Listen to their response in verse 9. God says, man, where are you at? Where you at, bro? Verse 10. Don't apologize, David. I love it. This is great. This is the best thing that can come from behind me as I read Scripture. Verse 10. Listen to what happens, verse 10. He answered. This is Adam. I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And then God said to him again, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I command? That's 3 questions. Again, God just keeps giving him an opportunity to just come clean, to just own up to it. And God's asking him questions that God already knew the answers to. Listen to what your boy said in verse 12. The man said, the woman, not my wife, not my sweetheart, not my honey, not my boo, not my best friend, not my lover, not the best thing that's ever happened to me, not my girl, my baby, my future baby mama, my everything. He said, the woman. It's like, I'm going to sleep on the couch today, but I don't care. The woman, you ready for this? You put here. Oh, snap. Somebody come get your boy. Because he's tripping, David. He's finna throw everybody under the bus. The woman, he says, that you put here. Anybody remember what Adam said in chapter 2 when God brought Eve? Right, you know the story, right? Adam takes a nap, best nap I always say any man's ever taken, because he woke up and he's like, boom, there's your wife, right? Didn't even have to go on any app or go on a first date or anything. God's like, hey, I took care of all of that, right? It's the best, most arranged marriage in the world. Here she is. When Adam met Eve, he said, this is now the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh. And all the angels were like, whoa, that boy good. Wow. And he's like, stop it. Stop. He's like, it's true, girl. You're the bone of my bones and you're the flesh of my flesh. Man, that is good. That's poetic. That's romantic. That's incredible. Fast forward 13 verses later, the woman you put here. Okay, you remember, God, you put her here. I was fine. I was good. I wasn't on eHarmony or Christian Mingle. I was single. I didn't even know that I could mingle. I was having a good time, living my best life now, just chilling in the garden like Bernie at the inauguration, just minding my own business. I didn't have mittens on because, you know, the gardens like San Diego, perfect weather, just doing my thing. Just chilling. My buddy Nick texted me last night. He's like, you got to work the Bernie meme into your sermon somehow. So, Nick, I hope you're watching, and I hope you're happy. I stayed up all night trying to find that connection. He's like, I'm just minding my own business. And then you put the woman in here, yada, 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 ate the apple, and look where we ended up. I made a list just so you can see how deceitful our hearts are of all the lies that Adam and Eve told themselves. When we read this story, we often think about the lie that the serpent told. That's not the lead story. Yes, the serpent lied to them, but the serpent only lied once. Can I read you just a short list of the lies that they then told themselves? They were deceived by the serpent, but make no mistake about it, Adam and Eve deceived themselves far more than the serpent did. Lie number one that they told themselves, I can clean this up. Right? What was the first thing that he did when they sinned? He's like, I can clean this up, man. I just need some fig leaves. Anybody ever done this before? You know what I'm talking about, right? Where you get yourself in that place, you open door number one, and you're like, and the consequences are right there, and you're like, I got this. I can clean this up. I just need some fig leaves. So that's the first lie that he told. The second lie is I can hide from God. I just need a big enough tree, okay? I remember there's an oak tree that I saw the other day when I was, naming the animals. If we hide there, Eve, God's not gonna see us. This is what our hearts do. Our hearts deceive us further and further. And a lot of times we're going to continue to double down. And so when he messes up, his instinct is like, okay, I can keep this. I can hide. I can clean this up. I can hide from God. Lie number 3 is that it's her fault. So not only can I clean it up, but can I hide from God, but it's her fault. Okay, I just need everybody to see that It was Eve's fault, okay? She tied me down in the chair and she put the fruit in my mouth. It's her fault. And lie number 4, it's God's fault. So I can clean it up. I can hide. It's her fault. It's God's fault. This, you guys, is what Jeremiah is talking about, our hearts. Rather than repent. And I don't know how the story would have gone, but can you imagine what would have happened if Adam's story, when God said, where are you? And he goes, oh man, I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting. I'm so sorry. I jacked this up. I messed this up. We shouldn't have listened to the serpent, but we did, and we ate it, and now there are consequences. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but you are the God of the universe. You can redeem all things. Surely you're not surprised. Surely you have a plan. Surely you can do something to bring good out of this bad situation. Imagine if that was his response. But that's not what Adam did. Adam did what you and I do because our hearts are deceitful. He decided to hide and shift the blame. And guess what? One verse later, Eve does the same thing. Thousands of years later, you and I do the same thing. We hide and we shift the blame. Oh, it's my mom. If you met my mom, Pastor, then you would know exactly why I am the way that I am. Oh, it's my dad. He never told me that he loved me. He never told me that he was proud of me. He wasn't really present. He was absent in my life. That's the way. That's the reason that I am the way that I am right now. It's the family I grew up in. You should come and see my family during Thanksgiving. Then you will understand how I got myself in the place that I got myself in. It's the friends I had in high school. Man, they were terrible. It's the politicians. It's the culture. It's the city that I grew up in. It's the debt that I inherited. It's all of these students' loans. It's because nobody ever told me. No one ever taught me. It's the life that God gave me. It's the cards that God dealt me. That's why I am where I am right now. These are the things, come on now, that we say to ourselves. Now, please don't miss the point. I'm not saying that there's no truth in that. I'm not saying that people and our environment doesn't play a part in us getting to where we get to, because obviously they do, right? And what's interesting about what Adam said is there was some truth in it. Eve did give him the fruit. The scriptures tell us that, right? And so, no, I'm not saying that we are where we are all on our own. There are factors and people that play a part. What I'm saying, though, is that now that we are here, we have a choice. Now that we've eaten the fruit, we have a choice. We can either double down like Adam and Eve and continue to con ourselves. We can hide and we can blame. Or we can decide that we are going to be brutally honest with ourselves. Can I tell you something that's going to sound really weird coming from a pastor? If you decide to lie to other people, I can understand that, right? I mean, I know God doesn't want us to lie, and so we shouldn't lie. But if you decided that I'm going to lie to the people around me and to my friends and to my family and to my coworkers and the people in my circle, I'm going to lie to them. If we do that, if we hide and we blame and we lie to them, it at least makes sense, right? It's like, okay, I can understand that, maybe for some, selfish reason you think that's what's best for you, that you would lie to them. But come on now. Why would we lie to ourselves? I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks. Sammy, I've been asking myself, why would I lie to myself? It just doesn't make any sense. Why would I lie to myself? It's like that scene from the movie Liar, Liar. Anybody seen Liar, Liar? I haven't seen it in a long time. But remember Jim Carrey is punching himself? And the guy comes in and is like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm kicking my own butt. Do you mind? He's punching himself. And the guy's like, why would you punch yourself over and over again? Why would we lie to ourselves? Why? I know it sounds crazy, but I am convinced that being honest with ourselves might be the most courageous thing that we can do in our lives. Could it be that the most courageous decision that you're going to make in your life is not, I'm going to quit this job and do this thing or move to a third world country and be a missionary? Could it be that maybe the most courageous decision that you and I are going to make in our lives is to say, hey, I am just going to be brutally honest with myself. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to blame. I know that there are other factors at work, but I am going to come to terms with the honesty and be truthful with myself. Listen to how Pastor Andy Stanley put it. He says, tell yourself the truth, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself. Will you tell yourself the truth, even if the truth makes you feel bad about yourself? I think if most of us are honest, the answer is no. I think I've been in ministry, met with enough people to know, and I know myself well enough to be able to say that for most of us, the answer to that question is a big fat no. The answer is that we are not willing to be honest with ourselves because we're not sure we're going to like how that makes us feel. It's so much easier to talk about the lies that the enemy tells us and the culture is telling us and the world's telling us. It's so much harder to acknowledge the lies that we tell ourselves. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but could it be that a big part of the reason most of us have a hard time being honest with ourselves is because we bought into the lie that that's the worst thing that could happen? Right? The worst thing that could happen is for me to be honest about where my marriage is. The worst thing that could happen is for me to be honest about my spiritual health, my physical health, my emotional health. The worst thing that could happen if I could be honest about my job, about why I did what I did, about my situation, about how bad it is. That's the worst thing that could happen. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everybody watching in the room and online, I would love to propose for you this morning that that's actually the best thing that could happen. Could it be that the best thing that we could actually do is for us to confront our own humanity and be brutally honest with ourselves? Could it be that the best thing that could happen is for us to own our baggage the way the prodigal son did? I reread the prodigal son story this week, and man, it changed. I've heard and read that story a million times, but I saw it in a different light. For the first time, I noticed how honest he was with himself. You ever notice that? You ever notice how brutally honest the story is? For those of you who don't know the story, Jesus tells this parable in Luke chapter 15. There's a father, he had two sons. And one son, and again, we often think the prodigal son, he's the bad guy, he's the rebel, he's the black sheep. And the prodigal son goes to his father, and he didn't even lie to his father. So even at his worst, he was honest. He wasn't like, I need a loan, can you give me a little, I'm trying to start a little business, and I have this side hustle. No, he went to his dad. He's like, screw you, don't care about you, wish you were dead, give me my inheritance now, and I am gone. And the father did, and he took his inheritance, and he blew it in wild living. I heard a preacher say the other day, it was so good. He's like, a lot of times when we read that part of the story, we often imagine all the things that are horrible that we would never do. That's not the point. The point is what you would do. He did what he would do the same way that you would do what you would do in that situation. And so the prodigal son took all of his inheritance and he blew it. And he hit rock bottom. And when he hit rock bottom, he did something that Adam could not do. This is crazy. Plot twist that you never saw coming. But the prodigal son set a better example for us than Adam. What did Adam do when he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar? He doubled down. He listened to his heart. He let his heart deceive him. He hid from himself. He hid from God. He blamed his wife. He blamed God. What did the prodigal son do when he hit rock bottom? He was honest with himself. Yes, he was honest with his dad, but before he was honest with his dad, he was honest with himself, right? He's like, I jacked this up. I messed this up. This is on me, and I got to do something about it. And then he decides that he's going to go home. And I know we love to jump to the part of the story when his dad came and his dad gave him a big hug and embraced him and threw a party for him because he was lost and now he's found. He was dead and he's alive. But come on now, church. Could it be that the reason most of us have never felt the unconditional embrace of a loving father is because we've never had the kind of honesty the son had? We want the embrace without the honesty. We want the party without the reckoning. But don't miss that the son had to be honest with himself, and then he was honest with his father. Listen to what he says in Luke chapter 15, verse 21. The son said to the father, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you." Think of all the excuses he could have made. He could have said, you gave me your inheritance, and then I was driving, and I got mugged and robbed, and they took it all. He could have said, it's the guy that I work with, it's the friends that I had, they ripped me off. He could have said, I got an email from a Nigerian prince, he had an inheritance, and he wanted me to send my account information, and I did, and I fell for it, and I lost everything, Dad. I was scammed. I didn't know. Nobody warned me about the Nigerian. He could have come up with any excuse, but he didn't. And yes, I'm sure there were other factors at play, but listen to what he says. He says, Father, I have sinned against you and heaven, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. What refreshing honesty. But before he did that with his dad, he had to be honest with himself. If we want to change our lives, I said this 3 weeks ago, I'll say it again, we have to change the way we think. But in order to change the way we think, we have to recognize the lies that we believe, replace those lies with truth, and repeat the process over and over and over and over and over again. But here's the deal. When most of us hear that, we think of the lies that we are being told by outside factors and other people. But today, God is asking you to pause and just consider the lies that you're telling yourself. Can't change your life if you don't change the way you think. Can't change the way you think if you don't acknowledge the lies that you are selling yourself. Nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. You and I have done more to undermine our success and progress than anybody else. And my prayer this morning is that God would give me and everyone in the room and everyone who's watching the courage to just be honest with ourselves. Imagine what would happen if we had the courage to just ask why. Like, really, why? Why? Why did I really do that? I know what I told myself, but why did I really do that? Why do I continue to go out with him or her? Really? Why did I tell myself the lie for so long that I can do whatever I want and not have to worry about my physical health and I'll be okay? Why? Why did I really buy that, really? Why am I really taking that job? Why am I quitting the job, really? Why did I move in? Really? What's the real reason I don't call my mom, my dad, my brother? What's the real reason why I'm not going to tell him or her the truth? Why do I keep staying later and later at work? Why did I respond the way that I did? Why do I really not want anybody to know this? Why is it so hard for me to say that to a circle? Why do I really think I don't need help? Tell yourself the truth, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself. 2 weeks ago, I asked the question, what's a lie that you're believing? Again, most of us think of the lies that we're being told, and certainly that's a part of the conversation. But today I want to ask you a much harder question. What's the biggest lie that you've been telling yourself, and why? If your answer is, I got nothing, then that's maybe your first lie right there. What is the biggest lie that you've been telling yourself? How have you been, again, come on now, people, why would we lie to ourselves? Okay, and for what it's worth, I said this to the guys earlier. I'm not even asking you to come up with a plan, right? Because come on now, let's be honest. Sometimes the reason we don't like to be honest is because if we're honest, then we're accountable. And if we're accountable, then we got to do something about it. And we don't want to do something about it. And so our hearts deceives us into believing that we're better off not facing the facts. And I'm just going to give you permission right now to say, you don't have to have a plan. You don't even have to do anything about it. All you have to do is just be honest. That's the starting point. God is saying to somebody this morning, where are you? In the same way that God called out to Adam, so many of us are hiding behind trees. And we keep doubling down on lies that we tell ourselves, and we believe the lie that it's too late. It's too late now, so we might as well cover, we might as well hide behind, we might as well blame. And God is saying, where are you? He knows exactly where you are, but he's just wondering if you're willing to acknowledge where you are. Where are you? Where are you physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, in your marriage, in your friendships, in your work, in your purity, in your heart? Where are you? Do you have the courage to be honest? What is the biggest lie that you have been telling yourself, and why? How have you been lying to yourself financially, relationally, spiritually, emotionally? Tell yourself the truth, even when the truth makes you feel bad about yourself. I told you guys earlier in the sermon about just the lies I've been telling myself about my physical health, and I just feel like I need to say this, that was not courageous, right? The reason I was able to come to that place, honestly, full disclosure, is because 3 weeks ago I took some blood tests for a thing, and the test came back and there's a number that's higher than it should be. Interesting, isn't it, how things like that can all of a sudden bring us back to reality? And it was like in that moment, I was reminded that there are far worse things than feeling bad about myself. In that moment, I was reminded that if I'm not honest with myself, I am just setting myself up for regret and heartache every time we choose to lie to ourselves, every time we continue the con, every time we scam ourselves, every time we hide, every time we blame, every time we don't confront. We are setting ourselves up for future regret. And so God is saying to you this morning, will you, by my grace, have the courage to just be honest? I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about it. What is the biggest lie that you've been telling yourself, and why? Even if you don't have a plan, even if you don't plan to tell anybody else, will you at least just tell yourself? You owe it to yourself to tell yourself the truth, even if the truth makes you feel bad about yourself, about your marriage, about your job, about where you are. What is the biggest lie you've been telling yourself? I'm going to give us a few minutes to think about that. And then we're going to sing a song. And there's a line in this song that I've been singing all week. And it says, I open up my heart to you. A lot of times we sing songs like that in church because they're like, oh, that just sounds like a good song to sing. But maybe it has a different meaning this morning. Could it be that in us saying, I open up my heart to you, it's us saying, God, I'm going to do what the prodigal son did. Not only am I going to be honest with myself, but I'm going to be honest with you. Opening up our hearts to God means that we are going to come to God with brutal honesty and say, these are the lies I've been believing. God, will you help me acknowledge it and replace it with truth? Tell yourself the truth, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself. Nobody lies to you more than you lie to yourself. But my hope is that God will do something this morning that changes that. That maybe 5 years, 5 months, 5 days from today, you can say, man, nobody tells me the truth more than I tell myself the truth.